While Silicon Valley was obsessed with building the next social media app for teenagers, its most revolutionary founder wasn't a 20-something dropping out of Stanford. He was a 72-year-old grandfather who had already retired. His name is Frank Adler, and in the 1980s, he was a legend. Not a rock star, but a software architect, one of the quiet pioneers who built the digital foundations of our world. He wrote code for mainframe systems when computers filled entire rooms. He helped design some of the first user-friendly operating systems, a man who saw the future in lines of assembly code. His career was a monument of quiet, brilliant achievements, celebrated within the tight-knit community of engineers who were changing the world. But by the time he turned 65, the world he had helped build had become almost unrecognizable. The industry grew younger, faster, and louder. The methodical, problem-solving culture he loved was replaced by a frantic race for user engagement, viral loops, and billion-dollar valuations. So Frank retired. He traded his keyboard for gardening shears and his flowcharts for woodworking plans. His home in Palo Alto was a quiet museum of a bygone era, filled with old programming manuals and the faint smell of sawdust. He was content, or so he told himself, but a subtle frustration was growing within him, a frustration that came to a head on his granddaughter Lily's 5th birthday. Lily lived across the country, and the family had arranged a video call. Frank sat down at his sleek, modern tablet, a gift from his son. He tapped the icon for the popular video chat app. A pop-up appeared, asking him to rate the app. He dismissed it. Another notification slid down suggesting he invite friends. He fumbled to close it. When he finally got into the call, the screen was a confusing mess of filters, animated emojis, and buttons he didn't understand. He could barely see his granddaughter's smiling face through the digital clutter. "Grandpa, can you see me?" Lily's tiny voice crackled through the speaker. Frank tapped the wrong button, and the screen went black. By the time he managed to call back, the moment was lost. The birthday cake was being cut, and all he got was a hurried goodbye. He hung up, but the feeling of failure lingered. It wasn't just a missed call, it was a missed connection. He looked at the tablet, a marvel of modern engineering, and felt a profound sense of alienation. This device, meant to bring people closer, had just pushed him further away. That evening, he sat in his study, surrounded by the ghosts of his past career. He realized the problem wasn't him. It wasn't that he was too old for technology. The problem was the technology itself. It had been designed by the young, for the young, with no regard for the millions of people like him, who didn't need more features, but craved more simplicity. A spark ignited in his mind, a spark he hadn't felt in years. It was the familiar, thrilling itch of an unsolved problem. He wasn't going to complain about the technology. He was going to fix it. He wasn't going to ask for a simpler product. He was going to build it himself. At 72 years old, when most of his peers were planning cruises, Frank Adler decided to unretire. He was going back to work. He was launching a startup. The first challenge was formidable. The programming languages Frank had mastered were now relics. He pulled out his old textbooks on C++ and Pascal, only to realize they were like trying to use a Latin dictionary to navigate modern-day Rome. The world now ran on Swift, Python, and JavaScript. So, with the same discipline that had defined his early career, Frank became a student again. He bought online courses. He spent late nights in his study, a cup of lukewarm coffee by his side, wrestling with concepts like object-oriented programming and API calls. He would go to a local coffee shop to work, surrounded by a sea of young coders half his age, their fingers flying across keyboards. He felt like an archaeologist trying to join a conversation about space travel. There were moments of deep frustration, moments when a single misplaced semicolon would bring his entire program crashing down, when he felt the immense weight of the years he had been away. But with each small victory, each line of code that compiled correctly, the old fire burned brighter. His goal was deceptively simple:
to create a device, a single-purpose communication tool for seniors. He called his prototype the Beacon. It wasn't an app on a tablet. It was a small, elegant wooden box with a screen and a single, large, illuminated button. No menus, no notifications, no settings. You press the button and it instantly connects you to your pre-programmed family members. That was it. The genius was not in what it did, but in everything it didn't do. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed a designer, someone who understood modern user experience but shared his vision of simplicity. He found her at a Stanford student project showcase. Her name was Maya, a brilliant 22-year-old design student who was growing disillusioned with the tech industry's focus on creating addictive, attention-draining products. When Frank showed her his clunky prototype and explained his vision, her eyes lit up. She saw the profound humanity in his idea. They formed the unlikeliest of partnerships, the veteran architect with decades of experience and the young, idealistic designer with a fresh perspective. He understood the deep, underlying structure of software. She understood the elegant, intuitive surface. Together, in Frank's garage, they refined the Beacon, which they renamed Connect. They built a working model and were ready for the next, most dreaded step in any Silicon Valley journey: seeking venture capital. They walked into their first pitch meeting at a prestigious Sand Hill Road VC firm. The room was filled with partners in their late 20s and early 30s, dressed in expensive hoodies and sneakers. Frank, in his simple button-down shirt, began to speak. He didn't talk about market size or user acquisition costs. He told them the story of trying to call Lily on her birthday. He spoke of the loneliness and isolation felt by his generation, a generation with disposable income but completely ignored by the tech world. The VCs were polite but dismissive. "But doesn't FaceTime already do this?" one asked, scrolling through his phone. "What's your monetization strategy? Advertising?" another chimed in. They saw an old man with a niche hobby project, not a disruptive technology. They couldn't see the problem, so they couldn't see the value in the solution. Meeting after meeting, the answer was the same: no, no, no. The dream, it seemed, was destined to die in the polished boardrooms of a world that had forgotten him.
They had one last pitch scheduled. It was with a smaller, less flashy firm, their last hope. Frank and Maya went through their presentation again, their voices tinged with the fatigue of rejection. The young partners in the room looked just as skeptical as all the others. But as Frank was telling the story of Lily, a senior partner, a man in his late 50s named David, happened to be walking past the glass-walled conference room. He stopped. He listened. David's own mother lived in a retirement home 3 states away, and their weekly video calls were a frustrating, technical ordeal that always ended with his mother feeling incompetent. He wasn't just hearing a pitch, he was hearing his own life. He walked into the room, cutting the meeting short. "I get it," he said, looking directly at Frank. "You're not selling a device. You're selling dignity. You're selling connection." The younger partners were stunned. David overruled them. He saw what they couldn't, that Frank's age wasn't a liability, it was his single greatest asset. He was building for a market he understood better than anyone else in the world. Connect secured its seed funding. With the investment, they refined the product and set up a small-scale manufacturing line. The launch was quiet, marketed not through tech blogs but through AARP magazines and community centers. The response was immediate and overwhelming. They were flooded with emails and letters not from customers but from families. A daughter wrote about seeing her mother, who had dementia, light up when she saw her face appear on the screen with a single touch. A son serving overseas wrote about how Connect was the only technology his elderly father could use to see his new grandchild. The stories were a testament to the fact that Frank had been right. The need was immense. The tech world started to take notice. Wired magazine ran a feature story on them titled "The Grandfather of Disruption." Frank Adler, the retired engineer, was suddenly a celebrated visionary. He was invited to speak at major tech conferences, not as a relic of the past, but as a pioneer of the future, a future of more humane, accessible technology. On stage, in front of thousands of young innovators, he didn't offer complex business advice. His message was simple. For decades, this industry has been obsessed with the next big thing, he said, his voice calm and steady. But we've forgotten about the big, simple things, like calling your granddaughter on her birthday. Experience isn't something to be retired. It's our most powerful, untapped resource. Today, Connect is a thriving company, but you won't find Frank in a corner office. Most days, you'll find him right back in his garage, which is now a sophisticated workshop tinkering with new ideas. And every evening, he uses his own Connect device to talk to Lily. The picture is crystal clear. The connection is perfect. He had not only built a successful company, he had built a bridge between his world and hers, proving that a great idea, born from a true human need, is truly timeless. Frank Adler built a bridge between two worlds, between two generations. What are the bridges you've seen built, or the ones you hope to build in your own life? We would be honored to read your thoughts in the comments below. To discover more stories of legends who are rewriting the rules, consider joining our community by subscribing.